everybody, I hope you had a great weekend. I wore this corset each day over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Today is Monday, so I am up to the 13th wear, and this is coming up to 30 hours. So this is pretty much the last video that I'm going to be doing on this seasoning mini series. And today I want to just kind of do a recap of the changes that I feel and the changes that I see in the corset at the end of seasoning compared to at the beginning before I even seasoned it. So how this feels on me now, I'm able to cinch it a little bit tighter than I was on the first day of seasoning. If you remember, I was cinched to about 26 inches that day because one, I was a little bit bloated, and two, I was only cinched down about 1.5 inches because it felt deceptively tight. Now that the corset has softened on me and the fabric has formed a little bit to my own natural curves, it's feeling a lot more comfortable. I'm able to cinch it down to 25 inches. I can cinch it a little bit lower than that actually, but I prefer not to until after the seasoning process is over. A couple of other changes that I've observed: the ribs do not feel quite as restrictive anymore. They're starting to cup nicely around my rib cage and give me a little bit more breathing room. I noticed that the waistband of this corset is cupping or it's hooking slightly underneath my rib cage. It's not riding up on my body anymore when I sit down. It's not feeling wobbly anymore. There is some wrinkling at the hips that have gone away from the first day. It has not completely gone away, but I think this is as good as it's going to get. And I think all things considered, considering how extreme this hip spring is, this is pretty good. I'm not feeling any hot spots, no pressure points anywhere. There's no area of the corset that's putting more pressure on my body compared to other, which is very important. And I also feel very comfortable along the back. There's no bones that are poking at me, no bones that are digging into, say, the top of my bum or my tailbone. There's no pressure in the lumbar area, and I'm also totally relaxed in this corset now, so I'm not feeling any muscle tension. No neck pain, no headaches, nothing of the sort. So you might be wondering, now that the corset's properly seasoned, what's the next step? And what I prefer to do with my freshly seasoned corsets is I gradually increase the hours but keep a light reduction until I'm able to wear it all day. And then at that point I start gradually closing the back until I'm able to close it as much as possible. This one is made to my measurements and it's made to close at about 20 inches. So it might take me another couple of weeks to be able to increase my hours and then close the corset. So it's going to take me a couple more weeks before I review this corset, but I am going to review it because so many people have asked about it. I received this corset a little bit late in the mail. I was hoping to have it properly seasoned and closed by the 1st of May, but that obviously didn't happen. But I am going to review it, so just give me a little bit of time to do that. Now, I'm not going to be totally documenting increasing my hours and closing the corset because this past mini-series was very time consuming, and I do still need to finish the Indiegogo campaign perks and everything like that, and some of my other side commissions. So I'm not going to be documenting that every day, but if anything arises, then of course I'll tell you guys. Okay, so here is the corset after the seasoning period, after 13 wears and 30 hours of wearing it. And I'm going to show you a couple of the usual changes that I see, and then some of the unusual changes, because this is a total recap. So the first thing I'm going to mention is a little bit of distortion around the grommet area. That's normal in many of my corsets. I have gone to great lengths to keep the bones parallel in the back and to prevent them from bending or kinking or making that sort of shape, because that can be both uncomfortable and it can weaken the bones in that area. But the bones themselves had become a little bit more flexible to curve over the lumbar area of the spine. But you will see, well, you can see, you might see in some of your corsets, the fabric itself wanting to make that sort of shape. And that's nothing really to worry about as long as the fabric doesn't rip or anything like that. It's just the tension on the waistline that wants to pull the threads of the fabric in that direction. You will also see some wobbling of the seams sometimes, especially distortion around the waistline. And I see some tension in the threads around the waistline. Now, what is unusual is that one of these seams did rip around the waistline, and you can see the mend right there. But a lot of the time, in many of my other corsets, I have seen the stitching become visible between the seams. So you can see that there is tension put on it, but it had not ripped. So just because you can see some of the threads showing, it doesn't necessarily mean that the corset itself is going to rip, unless you actually see like the end of a thread that it clearly looks broken. That you need to worry about, but just a little bit of tension around the waistline, you usually don't need to worry about that sort of thing. And here you can see the lining, and there's some wrinkling of the lining, that's usual, and I also see some tension of the threads around the waistline of the lining. However, the lining shouldn't really have any tension on it whatsoever, but there was no ripping or coming away of any of these stitching, so I can't complain. The hand stitching on the sides had also stayed put, so I'm pretty happy about that. You can see a little bit of wrinkling, a little bit of distortion around the grommet area, but none of the grommets are pulling out, so I'm not worrying about that. If your grommets are starting to show a little bit of fray around the fabric of the grommets, or if you're starting to see like you can get a fingernail under there and it's a little bit wobbly, that sort of thing is not normal, but these ones had stayed put. Now for some unusual things, the binding had started to fray on here, so you can see that the edge of the fabric wasn't caught properly in the binding. But like I said before, I arranged to have the maker send me a couple of strips of this matching silk so that I can fix it myself, because I wasn't going to ship it overseas to get it repaired. So that is not a normal thing to happen, but it doesn't actually affect the corset structurally, so I wasn't making a big deal out of it. And another thing that was unusual, now this is a structural problem, was that the seam had ripped at the waistline when I had a coughing fit. And I know there's some people going back and forth in the comments of that particular video. Was it my fault? Was it not my fault? Was it the maker's fault? Was it not the maker's fault? But you know, at the end of the day, it happened. So I mended it, and I know some people are not happy with my mending job. If I have more time in the future, I will make another video actually showing you how to take off the binding, how to remove the lining side, how to pick out the boning channels, how to remove the bones, how to actually stitch this up by machine so that it doesn't look like it ever tore in the first place, and then, you know, stitch back the top stitching, and then stitch back the boning channels, put the boning back in, stitch the lining back on, put the binding back on. But that is extremely time consuming and laborious, so I'm not going to do that right now. But that had held fairly well for the second half of the seasoning process, so I have no complaints. Now, just a note on some wrinkling, because I noticed that as I had broken this corset in, a lot of the wrinkles around the hips had gone away, but at the same time I gained a couple of wrinkles at the hip area in the back, especially like really close to the waistline where the hip spring was the sharpest. If you have an off-the-rack corset and you're noticing a lot of horizontal wrinkles, you generally don't need to worry about that. A lot of the time these horizontal wrinkles happen because the corset had not been properly roll pinned, or because the bones might be a little too short in their channels. So Sydney Eileen actually has a tutorial on her website on how to basically secure and anchor in the bones so that it can minimize some of those little horizontal wrinkles. So I'll link it down in the description below. But wrinkles are not necessarily a structural problem. They can be uncomfortable if you can feel the wrinkles through your skin, but you don't need to freak out and think that you did something wrong or that there is something structurally inferior about the corset if you notice more wrinkles after you seasoned it. So back to the embellishment here, the lace had stayed on really well. There was no stretch or pulling to the lace as it kind of curved around my body. The crystals had stayed on pretty well as well. I don't know if these are hot fix or it's E6000 that was used to glue it on, but most of them had stayed on. A couple of them fell off when I bumped into a wall. I had a klutz moment, but they're staying on pretty well. And depending on what kind of crystals are used and what kind of glue is used and how you're using this corset, you might notice more or fewer crystals fall off. But it's a good idea to, you know, keep a spare little tube of glue if you want to glue any of your crystals back on. So thank you for joining me on my Season With Me mini series. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was informative. I hope it was a little bit easier to understand compared to the one brief video that I had made a couple of years ago. And as always, if you have questions, and leave them down in the comments, I'll be happy to get back to you. And I will see you guys in a few days for the next video. Bye.